In the world of politics, power is always in motion. Institutions collide, but what happens when a nation's highest court removes its own head of government? Today, we're diving into the constitutional crisis that pushed Pakistan right to the edge.
Just think about that for a second. This wasn't a coup, it wasn't an election, it was a court verdict, a piece of paper that disqualified Prime Minister Yousuf Raza Gilani and threw a nuclear-armed country into absolute turmoil.
So, how on earth did it get to this point? Well, it all started with a single court ruling that lit a political firestorm, pitting the judges against the government in a raw battle for power.
You know, this conflict didn't just pop up overnight. It had been simmering for years. It all began back in 2009 with a court order to reopen an old corruption case. The Prime Minister refused. That led to a conviction for contempt of court on April 26th. And then, the knockout punch. On June 19th, the court declared he was no longer fit to hold his office.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. Instead of digging in for a huge political war, the government did something nobody expected. They accepted the verdict. They just moved on, immediately starting the process to pick a new prime minister. It was a calculated move to lower the temperature, for sure. But the real fight? Oh, that was far from over.
Because you see, this was never just about one man or one court case. At its very core, this was a standoff about the Constitution itself. It was about one simple but critical question. Who really has the final say?
The official charge that brought everything down was contempt of court. Basically, he was found guilty of ignoring a direct order from the highest court in the land. But his government saw it differently. They argued they weren't being disobedient, they were just trying to follow the Constitution.
And this right here, this lays out the entire deadlock. On one side, you have the Supreme Court demanding the Prime Minister write a letter to Switzerland to reopen a corruption case against the President. But on the other side, the Prime Minister refused, arguing that the President has total immunity under the Constitution. Writing that letter, in his view, would mean breaking the very oath he took to protect that Constitution. It was a complete and total constitutional standoff. If you value deep, unbiased political storytelling like this, go ahead and like this video and make sure you subscribe to Mindscapes by Faizu for more. And that's exactly how the ruling party saw it. A senior official, Taj Hyder, put it bluntly. He's asking, why is the court forcing us to choose between obeying them and violating the Constitution? It was an impossible position.
Of course, this battle wasn't just happening in the halls of power. Out on the streets, the verdict split the country right down the middle. People were deeply, deeply divided. For a lot of people, especially in the legal world, this was a massive victory for the rule of law. They saw it as proof that finally, nobody was above the law, not even the most powerful person in government. A golden day for justice.
But for so many others, this was just a frustrating political circus. You know, with the country facing power outages and economic problems, a lot of regular people felt like their leaders were just wasting time on a power struggle that had nothing to do with their everyday lives.
And for those who supported the government, this wasn't really about the law at all. A feeling started to grow that the judiciary wasn't a neutral referee anymore, but that it had become a political player with its own agenda.
As you can imagine, the moment the verdict dropped, it sent shockwaves through the entire political system. It created a power vacuum and a whole cascade of chaos and uncertainty.
The fallout was immediate. First, they had to scramble to find a new prime minister. But it gets worse. Every single decision Gilani had made since his conviction in April, we're talking about the entire national budget, was now legally up in the air. Even internationally, allies like the US were left scrambling. And the biggest problem of all, it didn't solve anything. The next prime minister was going to face the exact same demand from the court. And you have to understand, this didn't just come out of nowhere. Most people saw this as just the latest round in a long, ongoing fight for control between Pakistan's three major power centers, the elected government, an increasingly assertive judiciary, and of course, the ever-powerful military.
When the dust settled, the ousting of a prime minister left behind some really big, really unsettling questions about the future of democracy in Pakistan itself.
So what's the takeaway here? Was this a historic win for accountability, a sign that democracy was getting stronger? Or was this a case of judicial overreach, an unelected body stepping way out of its lane and destabilizing the government? Honestly, the answer really depends on who you ask.
And you know, throughout this entire showdown between the court and the prime minister, there was one player that was publicly silent, but always there, looming in the background. The military. The silent power. And as is so often the case in Pakistan, everyone was left guessing.
What role was the army playing behind the curtain? If you found this exploration of power and politics compelling, make sure you subscribe to Mindscapes by Faizu for more.
At the end of the day, this crisis in Pakistan is a powerful case study for a question that haunts democracies everywhere. When the very pillars of the state go to war with each other, who's really in charge? And what happens to the will of the people they're all supposed to be serving?